Before the world finds you, there is a window. It opens every single morning, without exception, regardless of what happened yesterday, regardless of what is waiting for you today. It opens in silence. It opens in the space between the last dream and the first thought. It opens in the 15 to 30 minutes when your brain is still warm from sleep and the noise of the world has not yet arrived to claim you. And in that window, every single morning of your life, a choice is being made. Not consciously, not deliberately, not with any awareness that a choice is even happening. For most people, that choice is being made by default, by habit, by the accumulated weight of years of automatic behavior that has never once been examined or questioned. And the result, the life that has been constructed from 10,000 of those unconscious morning choices, is the life most people are living right now. Not bad, perhaps, but smaller than it should be, quieter than the person inside deserves. Further from the vision that occasionally flickers at the edges of their awareness and then disappears before they can quite grasp it. What I am going to give you today is not a morning routine. Routines are mechanical. Routines are things you add to a life. What I am going to give you is something far more fundamental, a complete scientific and philosophical understanding of why the morning is the most leveraged hour of every human life, what is actually happening in the brain during those first waking moments, and precisely how the greatest achievers in history, from the ancient Stoics to Nikola Tesla to the neurologically studied elite performers of our own era, have used that understanding to build lives of extraordinary purpose and result. By the time we are finished, the morning will never look the same to you again. This is Napoleon Hills' method, and we are going to take our time with this one. Part 1, the window what science found that mystics already knew. Let me begin with a fact so precise and so well documented in the neuroscientific literature that it should, by rights, be taught in every school in the world. It is not. When you transition from sleep to waking, your brain does not switch states the way a light switch operates. It does not go from off to on in a single moment. It transitions through a spectrum of neural activity that is, in certain specific and measurable ways, unlike anything your brain does at any other point in the day. In the deepest phases of sleep, the brain produces what electroencephalographers call delta waves, slow, high-amplitude oscillations running at roughly 0.5 to 4 cycles per second. As sleep lightens toward waking, these give way to theta waves oscillating at 4 to 8 cycles per second, and then, as full wakefulness arrives, to alpha and beta waves, the faster frequencies associated with relaxed awareness and active conscious thought. The transition through theta is not instantaneous. For the average adult, it lasts between 15 and 30 minutes after the first moment of waking, sometimes longer. And during that transition, something is happening in the brain that researchers have been documenting with increasing precision for the last 4 decades. In the theta state, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of your executive function, your critical analysis, your skepticism, your evaluative judgment, has not yet fully come online. It is warming up. It is moving toward the level of activation it will eventually reach, but it has not arrived there yet. And what that means is that the normal filtering system that governs what information enters your deep belief architecture, the gatekeeper that stands between the external world and your core self-concept, is operating at reduced capacity. The door is open, not slightly ajar, open. Now here is the question that matters. And it is the question that Napoleon Hill spent 2 decades observing the greatest achievers of his era trying to answer. When the door is open, what walks through it? For most people, the answer is whatever happens to be standing there. The phone notification, the anxious thought, the memory of yesterday's unfinished problem, the news headline, the social media feed, the list of everything that is wrong, unresolved, threatening, or insufficient. These things walk through the open door. They are planted in the deepest, most receptive layer of the waking mind. And for the next 16 hours, they run as background programs, influencing mood, shaping attention, narrowing the field of what feels possible, coloring every perception and every decision with the particular emotional residue of that morning's first input. This is not speculation. It is measurable. It is the neurological foundation of what Hill described in the language of his era as the subconscious mind's tendency to receive and amplify whatever is planted in it, purposeful or accidental, nourishing or toxic. The mystics knew this. Long before the prefrontal cortex had been identified, long before EEG technology could map brainwave frequencies, the contemplative traditions of virtually every major civilization on Earth had identified the morning as sacred time, as liminal space, as the threshold between the world of dreams, where something deeper in the human mind operates, and the world of action, where the day is lived. The Stoics of ancient Rome practiced what they call the morning meditation, a deliberate, structured engagement with their values, their intentions, and their philosophy before engaging with the world. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, began each morning by reminding himself of the people he would encounter that day, of the challenges that awaited, of the principles by which he had decided to live. He was, without knowing the neuroscience, doing something extraordinarily sophisticated, using the theta window to preload his subconscious with the values and intentions he wanted running as his operating system for the coming day. The Jewish tradition has the Modéani, a gratitude prayer, said at the first moment of waking, before rising, before speaking, before any other thought. The Islamic Fajr prayer is performed at dawn. Buddhist monastic practice begins before sunrise with meditation and intention setting. Across cultures, across centuries, across wildly different philosophical and theological frameworks, the unanimous human intuition has been the same. The morning is not just a time of day, it is a type of mind. And that type of mind deserves to be treated differently from any other. What science has done is give us the precise mechanism behind the intuition. It has allowed us to understand why the ancients were right and how to apply their wisdom with the specificity and precision that our complex modern lives require. Let us go deeper into the neuroscience, because the theta window is only part of the story. And the rest of the story is, if anything, more remarkable. In the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking, the human body undergoes what neuroscientist Andrew Huberman at Stanford University has described as one of the most important biological events of the day, a sharp, coordinated rise in cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that has been catastrophically misrepresented in popular culture. It is almost universally described as the stress hormone, as a chemical to be minimized, avoided, managed, kept low. And in chronic, sustained elevation, cortisol is indeed problematic. The research on the long-term effects of chronically elevated cortisol on immune function, on hippocampal volume, on sleep quality, on metabolic health is genuinely sobering. But the morning cortisol pulse is not the same phenomenon. It is not pathological. It is essential. The morning cortisol spike, driven by the circadian biological clock and the stimulation of morning light hitting the retina, is the primary biological trigger for wakefulness, alertness, and the focused mental engagement that productive work requires. It mobilizes energy. It sharpens attention. It prepares the immune system for the day's demands. It is, in the most literal physiological sense, the body's daily signal that it is time to engage with the world. But here is what Huberman's research has illuminated with particular clarity. The psychological context into which this cortisol pulse lands is not irrelevant. It is determinative. When the morning cortisol spike occurs in a calm, low stimulation, intentional environment, when it lands in a mind that has been given space and quiet, it primes the brain for focused attention, purposeful action, and what researchers in positive psychology call approach motivation, the neural state oriented toward engagement, exploration, and the pursuit of goals. When the morning cortisol spike occurs in a high stimulation, reactive, anxious environment, when it lands in a mind already flooded with alarming news, social comparison, unresolved conflict, or the accumulated stress of an unmanaged inbox, it primes the brain for defensive reactivity, threat detection, hypervigilance, and what psychologists call avoidance motivation. The neural state oriented not toward building but toward protecting, not toward creating but toward managing, not toward the future but toward the problem directly in front of you. Two people wake up at the same time with the same amount of sleep and the same quantity of cortisol in their bloodstream. One looks at their phone immediately. One sits in silence for 5 minutes and orients their mind toward their purpose. By 9 a.m., these two people are not having the same day. They are not even operating in the same neurological state. The divergence began in the first 5 minutes after their eyes opened. This is what Hill observed empirically in the lives of the successful people he studied. He did not have Huberman's vocabulary. He did not know about cortisol or approach motivation or the prefrontal cortex. But he saw again and again that the people who built the most extraordinary lives were the people who owned their mornings, who refused to surrender the first hours of the day to external demand before they had first attended to internal direction. He called it the discipline of self-mastery. We now have the biology. There is one more piece of neuroscience I want to give you before we move into the practical framework, because it is perhaps the piece that changes everything, the finding that takes the morning practice from a nice idea to an absolute non-negotiable. It concerns a structure deep in the brain called the reticular activating system, or RAS. The reticular activating system is a network of neurons in the brainstem that serves as the brain's primary filter for incoming sensory information. Every moment of every day, your senses are receiving an enormous quantity of data, far more than your conscious mind can process. The RAS acts as a selective gateway, making continuous decisions about what information to allow into conscious awareness and what to filter out as irrelevant. The criteria by which the RAS makes these decisions are, in the broadest sense, based on relevance to survival, relevance to current concerns, and relevance to deeply held beliefs and expectations. This is why, when you are expecting a particular person to arrive, you notice their car from a distance before anyone else in the room does. This is why, when you learn a new word, you suddenly seem to hear it everywhere, not because its frequency in the language has changed, but because the RAS has been recalibrated to register it. This is why new parents wake instantly at the faint sound of their baby and sleep through thunderstorms. The RAS filters for what you have told it to look for. And now consider what this means in the context of your morning. Whatever you bring to mind with clarity and emotional intensity in those first waking minutes, your goals, your fears, your opportunities, your problems, your gratitudes, your resentments, you are in effect programming the RAS for the day. You are telling it, this is what matters. Filter for this. Bring me evidence of this. If you wake up and spend your first conscious minutes scrolling through evidence of everything that is wrong in the world, your RAS spends the day finding more evidence that things are wrong. If you wake up and spend your first minutes focused on what is threatening or unresolved in your own life, your RAS spends the day finding more threats and more evidence of insufficiency. But if you wake up and spend your first minutes holding clearly in mind the specific vision of what you are building, the goal, the relationship, the creation, the achievement that represents your definite chief aim, Your RAS spends the day finding evidence that this is possible, finding the connections, the resources, the people, the opportunities that support its construction. This is not mysticism. This is not the law of attraction in the popular unscientific sense. This is a documented function of the brain's filtering system. The opportunities were always there. The RAS simply was not programmed to show them to you. Hill wrote, "Set your mind on a definite goal and observe how quickly the world stands aside to let you pass." What he was describing with the metaphorical language of his era was the reticular activating system doing exactly what it is designed to do. Program it in the morning, deliberately, toward what you are building, and watch what your day starts to show you. Part 2. The architects of the morning history's most purposeful wakers. Before I give you the practical framework, I want to take you on a journey. I want to show you what this looks like in practice, not in abstract principle, but in the actual lives of specific human beings who use the morning with a clarity and an intention that, once you see it clearly, becomes almost impossible to imitate without results. Let us begin with Benjamin Franklin. Franklin was, by any measure, one of the most productive human beings in history. Statesman, diplomat, scientist, inventor, writer, civic organizer, philosopher. The breadth of what he accomplished in a single lifetime defies simple categorization. And yet he lived in the same 24 hours as everyone else. He had no advantages of technology or infrastructure that his contemporaries did not share. What he had was a morning architecture so deliberate and so consistent that he maintained it with minor variations for most of his adult life. Franklin's morning began at 5 o'clock, not with urgency or with the anxious rush to productivity that our era celebrates, with a question, a single specific question that he posed to himself every morning before anything else. What good shall I do this day? 5 words. But embedded in those 5 words was an entire philosophy of purposeful living. The question assumed that good was possible, that today, regardless of yesterday, contained opportunities for meaningful action. It directed attention toward creation rather than reaction, toward contribution rather than mere management. It oriented the day not around the demands of others, but around the intentions of the self. Franklin then spent the first 2 hours of his morning in what he called the morning question, addressed powerful goodness, and contrived the day's business. He read, he ate a simple breakfast. He planned the specific actions of the coming hours in relation to the broader goals he carried. He put his values in direct contact with his calendar before the calendar was filled by anyone else's priorities. At night, before sleep, he asked the complimentary question, "What good have I done this day?" He reviewed the day against his intentions, not to punish himself for failures, but to close the loop consciously, to complete the circuit between morning intention and evening accounting. Over decades, this simple architecture, morning question, evening review, became the foundation on which everything else Franklin built was constructed. Not the particular content of any given day's plans, but the habit of intentionality itself, the practice of treating each day as a conscious project rather than an event that happens to you. Now let us travel to the Ural Mountains of Russia in the late 19th century. Dmitri Mendeleev, the chemist who created the periodic table of elements, arguably the single most important organizational achievement in the history of chemistry, was known among his colleagues for a practice that they found eccentric, even unsettling. He slept, not normally, not the way everyone else slept. Mendeleev was notorious for sleeping at unconventional hours, for taking what we would now call strategic naps, for treating sleep and the hypnagogic states between sleep and waking as a legitimate and essential part of his scientific process. He told colleagues that the periodic table itself, the arrangement of 63 known elements, into a structure that not only organized the existing data, but predicted the existence of elements not yet discovered had come to him in a dream. He had been struggling with the problem for months, approaching it from every angle his waking mind could devise, without success. And then, in the state between sleeping and waking in the theta window we have already described, the complete pattern had appeared to him, fully formed. He woke immediately and wrote it down. What he wrote changed chemistry forever. The skeptical reader might be tempted to dismiss this as a romanticized anecdote. But the pattern, it represents the experienced breakthrough after a period of incubation in sleep or near sleep, is so consistently documented in the history of scientific and creative achievement that it has its own name in the psychological literature. The incubation effect. French mathematician Henri Poincaré described essentially the same experience. He had been working on a problem in complex analysis for weeks without progress when, boarding a bus and placing his foot on the step, the solution arrived complete and fully formed, interrupting a conversation he was having with no apparent connection to the mathematics at all. He described the certainty of the solution as immediate and absolute, not a hunch or a possibility, but a knowledge. Thomas Edison, who was perhaps the most deliberate exploiter of the hypnagogic state in history, famously napped in his chair holding steel balls in his hands. As he drifted into sleep and his muscles relaxed, the balls would drop to the metal trays below. The noise would wake him, and he would immediately write down whatever images or ideas had been arising in the transitional state. He described this practice as fishing for ideas in the sea between waking and sleep, and the catch, by any measure of history, was extraordinary. What all of these examples have in common, and what connects them directly to the neuroscience we discussed in the first section, is an understanding, visceral and practical, if not always explicitly articulated, that the human mind does not work only when it is consciously directed, that the deepest and most original thinking happens not in the focused analytical mode, but in precisely the transitional states that most people either sleep through or treat as dead, time to be hurried past on the way to getting things done. The morning is not just the beginning of the day. It is the mind's portal from the work it has been doing in the dark. Let us now look at someone from a very different world. Not a scientist or a statesman, but an artist. One of the most prolific and structurally disciplined creative minds of the 20th century. Haruki Murakami, the Japanese novelist, whose work has been translated into more than 50 languages and read by millions across the world, has been remarkably candid about the specific morning practice that underlies the production of his extraordinary literary output. When he is in the active phase of writing a novel, Murakami wakes at 4 in the morning. He works for 5 to 6 hours. Then he runs or swims. Then he reads and listens to music. Then he sleeps. He repeats this schedule every single day for the months it takes to complete a book. What is remarkable about his description of this practice is not the discipline it requires, though the discipline is genuine and significant. What is remarkable is his explanation of why the morning matters specifically to the work. He has written that the early morning, before the day has begun to accumulate its demands and stimulations, is the only time he has access to a particular quality of concentration, a state he describes as being close to a trance, in which the rational, self-critical, evaluative part of his mind recedes and something more instinctive and less guarded comes forward to do the actual work. He is describing, in the language of an artist, precisely the theta-adjacent state that neuroscience has documented, the state in which the gatekeeper is quiet and the deeper creative processes have room to operate. And he has said something else that is worth pausing on. He has said that the physical discipline of the practice, the running, the early rising, the regularity, is not separate from the creative work. It is the creative work. Because the kind of writing he does requires not just skill, but a specific quality of mental state. And maintaining that mental state over months of sustained effort requires the physical architecture of the morning practice to remain intact. The morning does not just contain the work. The morning is the work. This is what Hill meant when he wrote about the harmony of body, mind, and purpose. Not as a vague aspiration toward balance, but as a specific operational principle that the conditions of the physical morning, the quality of sleep, the nature of the first inputs, the level of movement and sunlight and nourishment directly determine the quality of the mental state in which the day's most important work is done. You cannot separate the morning from the mission. They are the same thing, approached from different angles. One more figure before we enter the framework, and this one might surprise you. Charles Darwin, whom we discussed in the previous episode in the context of energy management, was also a masterful morning architect. But what I want to draw your attention to today is not his schedule, it is his ritual. Darwin began each morning with a specific walk. Not exercise in the modern sense. He was frequently ill and could not exert himself strenuously, but a deliberate, unhurried walk around what he called his thinking path, a sand walk on the grounds of Down House, the property in Kent where he lived for 40 years. He would walk it in loops, each loop representing a problem or a line of thought he was carrying. He counted his loops with flint stones. If he was working through something particularly complex, he would set out more stones. He would walk until the stones were gone. And the walking, the rhythm of it, the physical movement through natural space was not separate from the thinking. It was the thinking. Darwin's walking practice is now understood to be a sophisticated and intuitively designed instance of what researchers call embodied cognition, the deeply established neuroscientific principle that thinking is not a purely cerebral activity, but a whole body process in which movement, sensation, and physical environment play active roles in shaping the quality and character of thought. Studies published in the Stanford Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences have shown that walking increases creative output by approximately 60% compared to sitting. Not because walking is more relaxing, though it often is, but because the bilateral, rhythmic, low-demand nature of walking activates neural pathways that specifically support divergent thinking, the kind of thinking that generates novel connections between existing ideas. Darwin was doing this every morning, every day, for 40 years. While most of his contemporaries sat at desks and pushed their minds directly at problems, Darwin walked his thinking path and let his mind roam, and returned to his desk with insights that no amount of frontal pushing could have produced. The lesson is not that you need a sand walk and a country house. The lesson is that the morning body and the morning mind are not separate concerns. That the physical ritual of your morning, how you move, what you see, where you breathe, is not merely context for your thinking, it is a determinant of its quality. Part 3, the 5 elements, the morning architecture of a changed life. We have spent considerable time in the science and the history. Now let us build something you can actually use. The framework I'm about to give you is not a prescriptive schedule. It is not a list of habits to add to your morning. It is 5 elemental principles, each grounded in the science we have discussed, each representing a distinct dimension of the morning practice that produces genuine change over time. You will apply them in the way that fits your life, but you will understand from the inside why each element works, so that when life disrupts your routine, when circumstances change, when the specific implementation becomes temporarily impossible, you know what principle you are trying to serve, and you can find another way to serve it. The first element is the silence threshold. Before any external input, before the phone, before conversation, before news, before music, Before any content produced by anyone other than yourself, you give yourself a period of silence. Minimum 5 minutes. Ideally, 15. This is not meditation, though it can include meditation. This is not journaling, though it can be accompanied by writing. This is simply the deliberate preservation of the theta window, the choice to stay in the open door state a little longer without immediately flooding it with the noise of the world. What happens in this silence is different for everyone, and it is not something you can force or manufacture. Some mornings it is genuinely empty. Some mornings a clarity arrives about something you have been struggling with. Some mornings you feel nothing in particular. All of these are correct. The point is not to produce an experience. The point is to establish in the neural architecture of your morning the primacy of your own inner life over the demands of the external world. You are teaching the brain a hierarchy. You first, the world second. And over time, this is the part that people find most surprising. The silence becomes productive in a specific and unexpected way. Because when you remove external stimulation from the theta window, the brain's default mode network activates. And the DMN, as we discussed in the last episode, is doing some of the most important cognitive work of the day, consolidating the memories of yesterday, making creative connections between disparate ideas, processing emotional content that needs integration. The 5 minutes of silence is not empty time. It is the most densely computational 5 minutes of the day. You are simply getting out of the way and letting the most sophisticated neural network ever produced by evolution do what it was designed to do. The second element is the intentional reorientation. After the silence, you deliberately direct your mind toward your definite chief aim, not toward your task list, not toward your obligations or your problems, toward the single most important thing you are building. This reorientation has a specific structure that makes it neurologically effective. It has 3 components. The first component is clarity of vision, the specific, sensory, emotionally alive image of what the achieved goal looks like. Not a vague aspiration, but a picture detailed enough that your brain simulation systems can engage with it. Where are you? What are you doing? What does it feel like? What has changed in the world as a result of what you have built? Neuroscientist Alvaro Pascual Leon's landmark research at Harvard Medical School demonstrated that mental simulation of an activity activates the same primary motor and sensory cortices as physical performance of the activity. The brain, for the purposes of neural encoding, cannot fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. The pathways built during vivid mental rehearsal are the same pathways used during actual performance. This is not a metaphor. This is physiology. When you vividly imagine your goal achieved, you are building the neural infrastructure of its achievement. You are, quite literally, practicing a future that does not yet exist and making it more likely to exist by doing so. The second component of intentional reorientation is gratitude anchoring the deliberate identification of specific things in your current reality that are evidence of progress, abundance, or support, not as a denial of what is difficult or unresolved, but as a calibration of the RAS toward evidence of what is working. Psychologist Robert Emmons at UC Davis, who has conducted the most comprehensive research program on gratitude in academic psychology, has documented effects so consistent and so wide-ranging that the scientific community has had to substantially revise its assumptions about the relationship between gratitude and well-being. Gratitude practice measurably increases optimism, improves sleep quality, strengthens the immune system, reduces inflammatory markers, and enhances the prefrontal cortex's capacity for executive function, all through the mechanism of attention direction and its downstream effects on neurochemistry. You are not being positive for the sake of feeling good. You are calibrating your brain's filter toward evidence of what you want to build more of. The third component of intentional reorientation is the day's single most important intention, not a to-do list, not a priority ranking of tasks, but the identification of the single action that, if completed today, would represent the most meaningful progress toward the definite chief aim. The one thing that, if nothing else gets done, would make today a victory. This is the implementation intention in its purest form, specific, actionable, pre-committed. Written down if possible, because the act of writing, as research on the generation effect in memory has consistently shown, dramatically increases the probability of recall and follow-through compared to mere mental intention. The third element is the body's first language. Before you engage your mind in the tasks of the day, you engage your body in movement. Not necessarily intense exercise, though if that is available to you and you have the energy for it, it is extraordinarily beneficial. But deliberate physical movement of some kind. A walk, a series of stretches, a short yoga practice, a run, whatever form fits your life and your constitution. The neuroscience here is unambiguous and has been replicated across so many studies and populations that it no longer even generates significant scientific controversy. Exercise, even brief, moderate intensity exercise of 20 to 30 minutes produces a cascade of neurochemical effects that directly and measurably enhance every dimension of cognitive function that morning work requires. John Ratey at Harvard Medical School, whose synthesis of the exercise brain research in Spark is among the most important books on cognitive performance of the last 2 decades, has documented that a single bout of aerobic exercise increases the brain's production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that promotes the growth and maintenance of neurons, strengthens synaptic connections, and enhances the brain's capacity for learning, memory, and creative thinking. It also produces a coordinated release of dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, the neurotransmitters that underlie motivation, mood regulation, and focused attention, respectively. The pharmacological cocktail produced by 30 minutes of moderate exercise is, in terms of its effects on prefrontal function and mood, comparable to several commonly prescribed psychiatric medications. Darwin walked, Murakami runs. Beethoven took long, fast walks every afternoon and was known to carry a pencil and paper for the musical ideas that arrived during them. Kierkegaard walked for hours each day and described walking as his best thinking. Thoreau organized his entire life around the principle that a day without a long walk was an incomplete day. This pattern across history is not coincidence. It is the body's most ancient and most reliable method for clearing the metabolic waste of yesterday and producing the neurochemical conditions for today's best work. Move your body before you ask it to move your mind. The fourth element is the protected creation window. After the silence, the reorientation, and the physical movement, and before you engage with any reactive demands, any messages, any meetings, any content created by others, you protect a window for your most important creative or generative work. The length is less important than the inviolability. 60 minutes is enough. 90 is better. 2 hours, for those whose lives can accommodate it, begins to produce the kind of sustained, deep engagement that produces genuinely original work. What matters, what is absolutely non-negotiable for this element to function, is the protection from interruption and from the particular form of reactive engagement that email, social media, and messaging platforms produce. Cal Newport, the computer scientist and author who has done the most rigorous thinking on the conditions required for deep cognitive work, has documented what he calls the attention residue problem. When you switch from a task to check a message and then return to the task, a portion of your attention remains on the message, on its content, its implications, the response it might require, even when you are ostensibly focused on the original work again. This residue is not minor. Studies on attention switching consistently show that after an interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to return to full engagement with the original task. In a morning of fragmented attention, check phone, work briefly, check phone, respond to message, work briefly, check notification. You are never actually doing your best work. You are doing the work that can be produced in the gaps between interruptions. And the gap between the best work and the interrupted work is not small. It is the gap between a life lived at full creative capacity and a life lived at a fraction of it. Protect the window. Guard it as if it is the most valuable thing you own, because it is. The fifth element is the closing anchor. At the end of the morning practice, before you transition into the reactive, responsive, external, demand-driven portion of your day, you complete a brief but deliberate closing ritual. It can be as simple as 2 minutes, but it is specific. It involves 3 things. First, an acknowledgement of what the morning produced, not an evaluation of whether it was enough. Enough is a trap that never releases anyone it catches, but a genuine, honest acknowledgement of what happened, what was created, what was clarified, what was moved forward. The brain's learning and motivation systems run on completion signals. Give them the signal. Second, a restatement of the day's single most important intention, now updated with whatever clarity the morning work produced. You began the morning with an intention. The morning has refined it. Write the refined version. This is the thread you carry into the rest of the day. And third, what I call the transition affirmation, a brief, specific statement that acknowledges the shift you are about to make, from creative mode to responsive mode, from internal to external, from deep work to the necessary management of the day's practical demands. This transition, when made consciously and deliberately, allows you to enter the reactive portion of your day with a groundedness that the morning has produced. Rather than having the transition happen accidentally and having the morning's clarity dissipated by the first demanding email you open, you are the person who built something this morning. You carry that into what comes next. The world's demands do not erase what you created before they arrived. Part 4, the enemies of the morning and how to defeat them. I would be doing you a disservice if I gave you the framework without giving you an equally honest account of why most people never successfully implement it. Not because they are lazy or undisciplined or lacking in intention, but because there are specific, well-documented forces working against the morning practice, and understanding them is the first step to defeating them. The first enemy is the smartphone. I do not say this as a cultural complaint or a nostalgic preference for a simpler time. I say it as a neurological fact about the specific effects of smartphone use in the morning on the exact systems we have been discussing. The smartphone, in its design and in the behaviors it enables, is the single most effective weapon ever created for the destruction of the theta window. And I want to explain exactly why, because the explanation makes the problem inescapable. Psychologist Adam Alter at New York University, whose research on addictive technology is among the most rigorous and alarming in the field, has documented that smartphone apps, social media platforms in particular, but also news applications, email, and messaging, are designed using the same behavioral psychology principles that govern gambling addiction: variable reward schedules, social validation loops, intermittent reinforcement of the checking behavior. These design principles exploit the brain's dopaminergic reward circuit with extraordinary efficiency. Each check of the phone produces a small, unpredictable reward: a like, a message, a new post, a piece of information which activates the nucleus accumbens and produces a micropulse of dopamine. This pulse is not satisfying. It is priming. It creates the wanting more that keeps the checking behavior going. Now consider what this means in the morning. The theta window is a state of low arousal, low dopamine tone, high neural receptivity. It is exquisitely sensitive to input. When you introduce into this state a device designed by teams of behavioral scientists and engineers specifically to maximally exploit the brain's dopaminergic reward circuitry, you are not just distracted, you are hijacked. The theta window closes. The cortisol spike lands in a state of reactive arousal rather than intentional calm. The RES gets programmed not by your definite chief aim, but by whatever the algorithm decided to show you first. And here is the most insidious part. It feels fine. It feels normal, because the hijacking is so complete and has been repeated so many thousands of times that the hijacked state is the normal state. The morning without the phone feels strange, empty, and vaguely uncomfortable. Not because the phone is necessary, but because the brain has been conditioned to associate the phone stimulation with the reduction of the mild discomfort of the theta transition. Breaking this conditioning is not a matter of willpower. Willpower, as we discussed in the last episode, is a finite resource that degrades with use. Putting the phone across the room is more effective than willing yourself not to reach for it. Using a separate alarm clock so the phone does not enter the bedroom at all is more effective than putting it face down. Establishing a clear, non-negotiable rule: no phone for the first 30 minutes after waking, no exceptions, is more effective than a daily negotiation with yourself about whether today might be an exception. Systems defeat willpower. Design your environment before your willpower has to do any work. The second enemy is what I call the tyranny of unprocessed obligation. Many people wake up anxious, not because of anything specific that happened during the night, but because the mind, particularly the default mode network during REM sleep, has been processing unresolved emotional content, incomplete tasks, and unaddressed concerns. The result for many people is a morning mind that is already preoccupied, already running the script of what is unfinished, already in the low-grade state of threat monitoring that chronic stress produces. When this is your morning reality, the silence threshold is not peaceful. It is uncomfortable. The absence of external stimulation does not produce calm. It amplifies the inner noise. And the temptation is to solve this discomfort by introducing external stimulation that at least drowns out the internal noise, even at the cost of the theta window. The solution to this enemy is not to fight the noise. It is to give it a specific container. Psychologist James Pennebaker at the University of Texas at Austin has conducted decades of research on what he calls expressive writing, the practice of writing freely and without judgment about emotionally significant events, concerns, or conflicts. His findings, replicated across dozens of studies and populations, are consistently remarkable. Expressive writing measurably reduces psychological distress, improves immune function, enhances working memory capacity, and reduces the intrusive, preoccupying quality of unresolved emotional content. The mechanism is related to the default mode network's processing function. When you give verbal and written form to unresolved emotional content, you are essentially assisting the completion of a process that the brain was already attempting to do: the labeling, the structuring, the narrative integration of experience that transforms raw emotional data into processed memory. The morning anxiety is not an obstacle to the morning practice. Addressed correctly with 5 to 10 minutes of free, uncensored writing before the intentional reorientation, it becomes the first act of the practice. You clear the inner noise by giving it a container, and then, from a cleared state, you orient toward your purpose. This is what Hill described as the process of transmuting negative mental states, not repressing them, not being positive despite them, but moving through them with intention until they are no longer blocking the channel through which purpose flows. The third enemy is inconsistency masquerading as flexibility. The morning practice described here produces its most significant results not through any single extraordinary morning, but through the cumulative neurological effect of repetition. The brain learns by repetition. The reticular activating system recalibrates by repeated exposure to the same intention. The default mode network becomes increasingly effective at the specific processing tasks you give it as the practice becomes habitual. A morning practice done irregularly, brilliantly on Monday, abandoned by Wednesday, resumed on Saturday, skipped again the following week, produces approximately none of these cumulative effects. It does not become a habit. The neural pathways do not deepen. The RAS does not have enough signal to recalibrate. The practice remains effortful and dependent on motivation, as every honest assessment of it confirms, is not reliable enough to anchor anything important. The neuroscience of habit formation, documented most comprehensively by researchers at MIT's Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences, including Anne Graybiel's landmark work on basal ganglia and habit circuitry, is unambiguous. Habits form through the consistent repetition of a behavior in a consistent context. The context triggers the behavior. The behavior, when repeated, gradually requires less conscious effort and less motivational fuel to initiate. Eventually, it runs almost automatically, consuming minimal cognitive resources. This is what you are building with the morning practice. Not a collection of difficult tasks to be accomplished each morning through the expenditure of significant willpower. A neural infrastructure so deeply encoded that the morning itself becomes the trigger and the practice follows with the same effortless automaticity as the best habits you already have. But it takes time. Habit researcher Philippe Lallet at University College London found that the time required for a behavior to reach automaticity to require minimal conscious effort ranges from 18 days to over 250, with a median of 66 days. 2 months of consistent practice before the practice begins to run itself. The enemy is the expectation of instant transformation. The friend is the understanding that consistency is the entire game, and that a perfect morning practice done for 10 days is worth far less than a good enough morning practice done for 3 months. Do it every day, even when it is brief, even when it is imperfect, even when you only manage 5 minutes of silence and 2 minutes of writing and a short walk. The consistency is the practice. Everything else is detail. Part 5. The Morning and the Life Hill's Deepest Teaching. I want to spend this final section on something that I believe is the deepest available understanding of what the morning practice is actually doing beyond the neuroscience, beyond the productivity, beyond the habit formation. Something that takes us into territory that Napoleon Hill spent his life trying to articulate, and that modern science is only beginning to find adequate language for. Hill's fundamental claim, the claim that runs beneath every specific strategy in Think and Grow Rich, beneath the definite chief aim, and the mastermind, and the burning desire, and all the rest, is that the human mind, properly directed, has access to a form of intelligence that exceeds its ordinary analytical, consciously directed function. He called it infinite intelligence. He was cautious and somewhat ambiguous about the nature of this intelligence, whether it was theological, philosophical, or simply a description of the unfathomable complexity of the subconscious mind's integrative capacities. But he was unambiguous about its existence and about how to access it. Through the consistent, disciplined, emotionally sincere direction of mental attention toward a clearly defined, genuinely desired purpose, maintained over time with the faith that the intelligence of the deeper mind would respond. Hill observed in 500 individuals across 2 decades a pattern of breakthrough, synchronicity, and unexpected resource that he could not explain in terms of ordinary cause and effect. The right person appeared at the right moment. The solution arrived after months of apparent stasis. The opportunity materialized in the exact form that was needed at the exact moment when the individual was prepared to receive and use it. He was not describing magic. He was describing a phenomenon that is real, that has been observed and documented across the history of human achievement, and that modern neuroscience has begun to provide the outlines of a mechanism for, even if the full mechanism remains in its deepest dimensions, genuinely mysterious. What we know is this: the human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, connected by roughly 100 trillion synaptic connections. The complexity of the network they form exceeds by many orders of magnitude the complexity of anything else in the known universe. The vast majority of the processing that this network performs is not accessible to conscious awareness. The conscious mind, the part that experiences your thoughts, makes your deliberate decisions, and produces the inner voice you identify as yourself, is, in the estimate of most neuroscientists, processing somewhere between 0.1% and 1% of the brain's total computational activity at any given moment. The rest is happening beneath the surface, in the dark, in the wordless, imageless, unfathomably complex processing of a system that has been shaped by millions of years of evolution to solve the problems of a living organism trying to survive and thrive in a complex and uncertain world. When you direct this system clearly, consistently, emotionally, toward a genuine and specific purpose, you are not just motivating yourself. You are programming a computational network of almost incomprehensible sophistication to orient its full, mostly unconscious processing capacity toward the resolution of a specific problem. And the morning is the moment when the interface between the conscious programmer and the subconscious system is most open, most receptive, and most responsive. This is why the morning practice that produces the deepest change is not merely a collection of productivity techniques. It is a daily active communion between the part of you that knows what it wants and the part of you that knows how to get there. The conscious mind provides the vision, the intention, the emotional fuel of desire. The subconscious mind provides the intelligence, the integration, the pattern recognition across the entire accumulated database of a human life's experience. Together, when consciously aligned through the morning practice, they form something that is genuinely greater than the sum of its parts. Hill called it the mastermind of the self. The whole mind, conscious and subconscious, working in harmony toward a single, clearly defined purpose. Every morning you practice this alignment, you strengthen it. Every morning you surrender the window to noise and accident, you weaken it. Not dramatically, in any single instance, but over time, over years, the cumulative difference between the person who owns their mornings and the person who doesn't is not a small difference. It is the difference between a life that feels chosen and a life that feels like it happened. Let me bring everything together now. Let me give you the synthesis in its simplest and most applicable form. The morning matters because of the theta window, the 20 to 30 minutes of neural receptivity in which the brain's critical filter is offline and the deepest layers of the mind are accessible to deliberate direction. The morning matters because of the cortisol spike, the daily biological mobilization of alertness and energy that, when it lands in a calm and intentional context, primes the brain for purposeful engagement rather than reactive anxiety. The morning matters because of the reticular activating system, the brain's filter, that programmed in the morning with clarity and emotional intensity toward the definite chief aim, spends the day finding evidence and opportunity in support of that aim. The morning matters because of the default mode network, the brain's most sophisticated integrative system, which operates most freely in the low stimulation, unfocused states of the morning silence, and produces the creative connections and emotional integrations that focused attention cannot manufacture. And the morning matters because of something beyond all of these specific mechanisms, something that the science illuminates but does not fully contain. The simple, profound, compounding power of choosing every single day before the world asks anything of you, who you are, and what you are building. That choice, made consistently over time, becomes a life. It does not require perfection. It does not require the ideal conditions. It does not require the perfect morning or the perfect practice or the complete implementation of every element of the framework before anything counts. It requires only the daily renewal of intention, the daily act of meeting yourself in whatever way your life allows before the world meets you. The daily planting of something purposeful in the most receptive soil available to you, the mind that is still warm from sleep and not yet hardened by the day's demands. Do that every morning for the rest of your life and watch what grows. I want to close with a question that Franklin asked himself every morning for most of his adult life. What good shall I do this day? 5 words. Every morning for decades. What he was doing with that question, what he could not have known neurologically but knew practically from years of lived experience, was programming his reticular activating system. He was telling his brain at the most receptive moment of the day, filter for opportunity to do good. Bring it to me. Show me where it lives in this particular day. And his brain, being the extraordinary instrument that every human brain is, spent the rest of each day doing exactly that. You have the same brain. You have the same window. You have the same 24 hours that Darwin and Franklin and Tesla and Murakami had. The only variable is what you do with the first 30 minutes of them. Tomorrow morning, the window opens again, as it always has, as it always will. And the question is not whether it will open, it will. The question is whether you will be waiting for it. There is something I want you to do right now, not later, right now, while this is still alive in you. Write in the comments the single thing you are going to do tomorrow morning in the first 30 minutes after you wake that you have not been doing. Not a list, one thing specific. The one thing that, if you did it consistently for 60 days, you genuinely believe would begin to change the shape of your life. Write it here. Because this community, the people who watch this channel, who have chosen to go deep rather than shallow, who have decided that their life deserves the level of seriousness we try to bring here every week, this community will read it, and the act of writing it in a public place to people who understand what it means is itself a form of the morning intention we have been discussing. It is a planting, and something in your brain, something in the subconscious intelligence that Hill spent his life honoring will take note. If this video has given you a new way of seeing the most underestimated hour of your life, share it. Not as a favor to this channel, but as a gift to someone in your life who is waking up every morning and surrendering the window without knowing they have it. And if you are not yet subscribed, if today is the first time you have found this channel, welcome. What we do here is serious, scientific, practical, and built on the deepest tradition of human wisdom about what it means to live fully and purposefully. There is nothing else quite like it. Subscribe and stay. Tomorrow morning, the window opens. Be there.